Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Brad. What's going on, buddy?
Oh, man, it's another day in paradise. I've got 2 days scheduled off from work this week. I've never been so excited to take a random day off in my life. Like, work has been kicking me in the balls the last few weeks.
You need those rest days, man.
What about you, man? What's going on?
I got a lot going on. Some stuff I'm not ready to share yet, but all good stuff. Just crazy busy. I've been dealing with some medical stuff today, and some other stuff that's going on that I'm excited about and nervous about. So I'll talk about it a little bit later once it clears up a little bit. But it's good things going on in life right now.
Oh man, don't tease everybody.
Well, you got to keep listening to find out what happens. You know.
Tune in next time in the escapades of Dan's life.
No, it's been a good week though.
Good.
I don't know if I mentioned it, but last weekend I went on a hike with a bunch of IC guys out the Delaware Water Gap and had a great time. Man, I can't tell you how much it means to get together with guys and do, tough things together. It wasn't a particularly taxing hike, but it was really good to just get out and do something outside with a bunch of guys. We met up with our buddy Andy.
Andy, the troll himself.
I had a great time, man.
Good.
We're looking to do a couple more things as a group here. There's a bigger hike out there too that we're looking to do. Yeah.
How long of a hike was it?
The one we went on was, how long was it? 3.5 miles, 4 miles, something like that. Okay. It wasn't terribly long, but it was out the Delaware Water Gap. So anybody who knows that area knows that it's, as you might imagine, it's a gap area where a river runs through, and there's very steep walls. So the first, I guess, half to 3/4 of a mile is pretty much straight up. So you get gas pretty quick, and there's a lot of false summits and jagged rocks. So it's a tough climb, and you get up to the top, and then it's a pretty good hike out.
Nice. But sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. Anyways, we've been talking around this idea of building your pack and what it means to have a group of men around you and the strength of the pack and all this stuff. What we haven't talked about up until this point is culture, right? So you've got a group of men. You, for whatever reason, decide that you're united around a certain cause or mindset or whatever. But the trick to it all is building a culture. I know that is something that you and I have been a part of, and we have done very well in terms of the battle teams that we're on in the Iron Council. Our battle teams are known for a certain aggressive culture, and not aggressive as in asshole aggro aggressive. It's more about, we have an aggressive mindset about setting goals and conquering them and not letting things get in our way. Yeah. But we had to build that culture out. So I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about culture and what it means to a team. And I'll throw it over to you to see if you can kind of kick us off and talk a little bit about what culture means to you and what your thoughts were when we started to kind of define our culture within our battle teams.
Man, that's a really big question.
It is.
That's also a very good question at the same time, because culture, in my opinion, is the connective tissue that holds a group together. You oftentimes are presented new situations. Like, you look at our battle team when it first came together. It's called Battle Team Romulus. At the time, it was a bunch of guys. A couple of them knew each other. You knew Cam and Jake and Rob a little bit, and then I joined shortly thereafter. And from that point, a bunch of new guys that very little established connection with these guys came in. And so this idea of culture comes into play. What can you do to bring this group of individuals together? How can you get them to rally behind a singular common goal, and then do so with excitement, with fervor, with a desire to actually create success? And creating that oftentimes is paramount in anything that we do, is this creation of culture for people to buy in. And ultimately, the biggest thing with culture that most guys need to realize is that it starts at the top. Whatever person has been appointed to be a leader or has been in place in a leadership situation has to work really, really hard to define what that culture is going to look like and then implement it. And in my opinion, the most important thing in any sort of culture is you have to identify what that common goal or that common interest that you all share is, and then get everybody on the same page to align to that. So, in other words, when we all formed Battle Team Romulus, our goal was to unlock the capability of the group individually and as a whole. This was something that we could only do through setting the example. Like, it started with you, it started with Cam. In order to create a culture, you guys had to show us what to do and then invest enough interest and enough emotional bandwidth, I guess, to know that not only was it important that you guys led by example, but that you cared enough that we were willing to do the same thing as well. So it's that connectivity, that willingness to say, okay, what's our common goal? What are we shooting for? And how can we as a group collectively get there? I guess going back to you, when you established that, what did that look like initially from day one for you and for Cam?
The interesting part about it is Cam and I always talked about culture. Well, we always talked about our view of the team. It wasn't until a good time into building the team that we actually stumbled on the concept of culture and what we were building from that mindset. I will say this, the once we honed in on a culture and really started defining that and what we wanted out of the team, it helped us in a couple of ways. It helped us identify men who would be a good fit for the team, men who would not be a good fit for the team, and then how we want to move forward. So we had what I would call a either a competitive or an achievement culture. And basically, we had a lot of, in the culture that we developed, goal achievement and quality performance were really valued. Setting realistic goals and establishing plans to meet them were important to us. And then we sprinkled in a little bit of competitiveness. And I think that once you get a group of guys together who are kind of goal driven to begin with, the competitiveness is just a secondary part of it. But it was a mixture of those two things combined with the fact that we tried not to live in an echo chamber where everyone was just like us, right? We tried to bring in people with different mindsets who still fit that same, trying not to use the word mindset again, but that same vision in terms of I'm competitive, I'm goal driven, achievement is what I'm after, that kind of thing. And if you bring people in who can view the world different ways, but still have that same mindset of yours, and this just happened to be the one that we were going after, you might be building a different type of culture, which is fine. You got to define that on your own. But if you can bring in people who can view the world differently, but still have that same overarching drive, that's where your culture really comes together. I'm thinking of, we had guys on the team who, oh gosh, different political views, different views on marriage, different views on, just about everything in the world. And we were able to collectively look at it and be like, okay, so let's figure out what Brad's goals are. How can we achieve those? Or how can he achieve those? And how can we help him get there? And through the culture and this 360-degree view of the world, we were able to help craft that and create this driving force that everyone kind of grew with. It's important to talk about, too, the value of why culture is important. Yeah. And it comes to a couple of things. So first of all, culture is important for engagement. If you have the right culture, people will be engaged because they'll be excited over what's going on. So we had men who were all striving to be better men. And between the goal-drivenness and the competitive part of it, that drove engagement. We drove engagement also in the fact that we literally just pushed the concept of leaning in and engaging with each other when we were having hard times. And it was just like a self-propagating thing where the more we engaged, the more the culture grew. But the other part of growing a good, strong culture like that is retention. By having that strong group, we were able to retain a lot of the members. And by having members who reside in a group for a long duration, people become, especially in a what I'll call like a growth organization, like what we're talking about, people will learn to trust more. People will share more. And it's especially true with men because we put up these false tough guy walls sometimes where we can't be real with each other. But the more we're around each other, the more we allow these walls to shrink down, and we can share and we can be, dare I say, vulnerable with each other. So engagement and retention are two huge parts of reasons to grow your culture. And I'm going to stop there, but I'd love to get your thoughts on those two things specifically.
You mentioned something very interesting right at the onset of when you went into that. You talked about how you guys had stumbled into this. We're not always going to know exactly what a culture is going to be, how it's going to be defined, and what it's going to look like. Like that really is so dependent on the group of men or women if it's, in other settings. It's really, really incredibly vital to be able to formulate and kind of create that culture around what you have. And when you do, what that does is by creating a positive, inspiring culture that's going to push and motivate men or women or whomever within your group to do more. Firstly, that's going to give them purpose. Like, you think about purpose. If I feel that I have some sort of purpose, if I'm in a group and I've got a purpose, I'm going to work like hell to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And if I am driven to work like hell to get there, and I see the men around me doing the same, what's that going to invariably do? I'm working hard. I see these guys working hard. I know, well, hot damn. They're willing to do the work. I'm willing to do the work. And that creates pride. That creates satisfaction. You think of, our battle team in this example, we were so incredibly proud of what we created. We were Romulus. We knew we were a big deal. We knew that that was a special thing. We knew that other people looked at us and looked and tried to understand what we were doing and how it was working. That in and of itself engenders engagement. It engenders retention. You see that around you. You realize, I know Dan's doing the work. I know Cam's doing the work. I know Jake is doing the work. I know David's doing the work. Everybody. It's this rising tide that lifts all boats sort of mantra of, okay, everybody's doing everything. I need to keep that level up. And as I continually raise the bar, just as they continually do, we all see each other doing that.
Mm-hmm.
That is, in and of itself, engagement. And I'll tell you what, any sort of situation I've been in my life where that's been the case, personally, professionally, those are situations I want to hold on to. I recognize that as a really good thing. It's lightning in a bottle, if you will, where you're surrounded by people who are on the same trajectory as you, who are doing the work, and as a result, you want to continue in that. That naturally creates retention. Attrition doesn't happen in those environments unless somebody knows that they are not holding up their end of the deal. They self-select themselves out. And as we saw when we created that culture, there were a few guys who weren't willing to do the work that we were, and they self-selected out. But because that culture had been created, others had seen that. People on the outside said, man, what's Romulus doing? Why are those guys killing it in every facet of their lives? I want in. And that culture created, this inclusivity that people wanted in on. We were in demand. People wanted to join us because they saw that. That engagement, that retention comes naturally because when you're in that, when you're involved in it, you just want to keep it up. Like, you don't want to stop because everybody else around you is doing the same, and it's empowering. I don't know how to better describe it.
No, you did a great job describing it. And what I was thinking about while you're talking was, we are talking specifically, or we're specifically using examples about our battle team in the Iron Council, but culture applies all over the place. You mentioned work a little bit in the past. I was thinking about an instance this weekend where, with my friend, I went to the range with my friend Sunday morning, and we've been friends for a long time. And we started out as just kind of hang out on the weekend type buddies, and then we've progressed over time. We do more stuff together, but the culture of our relationship has changed over those years, right? It was just the good time guys. We'd get together, would hang out with the families in the backyard, have a couple beers, jump in the pool, and whatever. It was fun. The culture of our relationship, though, as we started to hang out and talk more, has progressed to the point where we went and did a really fun thing Sunday morning. We brought our handguns out, we went shooting, and the conversation to and from the range was actually really deep. So the culture there has changed because we're both putting in the work and trying to get to a point where we're actually pushing each other to be better men. And it's not something that we consciously talk about. It's not something that we have a plan for, but we're both pretty conscious of the fact that, hey, there's something more here than just a drinking buddy or just the families like each other, so we're going to hang out kind of guy. there's a culture propagating there. And what we're seeing is that when you put the two of us into our larger group of friends, it's slow, but that culture is starting to spread a little bit. And guys are starting to open up a little bit more. And we're starting to see a little bit more of, we still have a good time when all the guys get together, right? We went out bowling with the couples a couple weekends ago. And we have a good time, right? And it's not always competitive. I mean, yeah, the bowling was competitive, but it's not always the guys being competitive, the guys being engaged in tough conversations or whatever. But there's a culture there and a bond there that grows over time because people put in a little bit of work and people put in a little bit of effort to make it more than just a superficial thing.
I like how you used effort, right? Like you have to put effort into it. Like you think of anybody in any situation, going back to this whole, personally, you're talking about your friend group. We've talked about this battle team within the Iron Council. The same thing applies at work. Same thing applies at home. Culture exists within a family. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
But that effort, that's what matters. You can't go into a situation saying, I don't need to work at this. I'm just going to be, this passive bystander and expect that culture to grow. The success of a good culture really depends on every single contributor to that situation, whether it's your family, whether it's work. If you have a work team, I oftentimes look at my work situation, and there are various examples in my company of bad culture, toxic culture, and great culture. I'm pretty fortunate in that I work in a department, in a division that is really focused on creating excellent team culture. It started with my senior director, who is an incredible culture setter, and it cascades down. I've been presented with a mantle to lead a team. And in this, it is, if I'm going to create the culture that I want within my team, I need to get buy-in from every single person on my team to some extent within their limits. And now I can't sit here and expect my, person on my team X to, become just like me. I'm me. I'm pretty aggressive. I'm type A in some capacity. I don't need that from him, but I need him to buy into the collective good and to actually put forth some effort. And if he does, and if he looks, past number one, focuses on what we can do to lift the team up as a whole, you see success. That's the case in any situation, regardless. It requires effort. And that effort, it can vary depending on the team, depending on the situation, depending on the culture you're trying to establish. But if you're unwilling to put forth any sort of effort, you're going to see toxic culture. It's going to happen. And you see it everywhere, all the time.
So to riff on that concept of effort, we have to talk a little bit about how to create culture.
Yeah.
Once you've formulated the concept of the culture that you want, you have to start introducing it in a lead by example type way. That's really the only way that you're going to, as a leader, institute culture. I'll use work example as well. I took over the manufacturing floor about a year and a half, 2 years ago at this point at my current company. And the culture there was that the employees did not think for themselves. Everything was run through the manager. There was no sense of responsibility, or I won't say responsibility, more, I think the better word is ownership and pride. Everything was just do what the manager says, CYA, don't take a step, don't think, just do. And I came into that, and first of all, I'm not a micromanager, so that kind of management style I hate. And I'm also looking at these guys going, they'll never be more than what they are unless I teach them to think for themselves, or unless I empower them to think for themselves, not teach them, because they're smart guys. They can think for themselves, but I need to empower them to do that. So I started about setting a culture of empowerment, and believe me when I tell you, it was not easy.
Yeah.
They had been ingrained to do, the don't take a step without asking mentality. And it took a lot, and I'm still fighting it to this day in some instances where it's like, well, what do you think we should do? That's been my go-to question for the last 2 years is, what do you think we should do? As long as it's not a ridiculous idea, we're going to go with it, because I want to empower them. I want them to say, hey, this is my idea. We're going to run with it. And get to the point where they don't even tell me, because they've been able to think through the pluses and minuses and kind of go. they're not making big decisions either. It's do we scrap this material? Do we, whatever. But
Yeah.
I want to take away the minutia so that they can work better and faster, so that I can work better and faster, and we're not all bogged down in every single step forward needs 2 levels of approval. But that's about building a culture of ownership, of pride, of responsibility, versus a culture of, the guy at the top makes the decisions and we're just the worker bees.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but it's just an example of how you have to bring the concept to the group if you're the leader, and bring that culture in, and especially in a work environment, you have to present it. I spend a lot of time talking to my guys about, these are our goals for the month, for the quarter, for the year. This is how we're doing on these goals. These are why these goals are important. And, I think sometimes it goes in one ear and out the other, but it's important that they keep hearing that and how they're part of the bigger picture for the corporation as well.
Yeah. You're trying to rewrite and create a culture. And that's hard. If there's already established a culture of, whether it be laziness, complacency, insecurity, whatever it is, trying to rewrite that narrative is hard, especially in a workplace environment. Something I'm drawn to is, I also am not a micromanager at all. I really try to foster an environment of innovation and self-dependency in my work. And just like you said, it's absolutely 100% leading by example. Like, something that I will do, again, I'm not here to pat myself on the back, but I do feel that something is very important in establishing a positive culture in a workplace environment is allowing my guys and my girls on my team to be able to innovate, to be able to create new things, and to take pride in that. So I've given my people opportunities. These are opportunities that they'd never received before. These are situations where in the past they'd be like, "Hey, Brad, I don't know what to do." So I tell them, "You know what? I trust you to make good decisions. Let's get this put together." Like, pretty recently, there's a guy on my team who's awesome and who's really taken full advantage of this. He built an entire dashboard on his own with, some oversight and guidance from me to show our entire company development bug backlog, what's getting worked on by engineering versus what should be getting worked on by engineering, so that could be presented to our senior director, and then in turn that could be presented to, VP of engineering. And it would be very easy for somebody in my situation to be like, "You know what? I taught him how to do all this. I made sure I oversaw it. I made sure he did a good job. This is something that I was very involved in." I said, "You know what? That's not going to help him grow and achieve this idea of innovation." So I went to my senior director, was like, "Hey, Paul, look what Rodney was able to do. This thing's awesome. I'm really proud of him." Gave him the floor to be able to explain what he put together. These are things that I taught him to do, but it showed him, you know what? You built this. You get the credit for this. This is going to get presented to leadership within the company because of you and your work. The message that teaches him in that moment is one that I hope that he's going to pass on to others. It's a culture of innovation. It's a culture of, you know what? I did this. My boss is going to give me credit for this. It comes back to a lot of the principles that Jocko talks about in extreme ownership. It's that innovation doesn't need to come from me. I don't need the plaudits. That my success is going to be almost entirely dependent on their success, and I sure as hell want my team to be successful.
It does a lot of things. So it does do that. It gives them pride in their work. It gives them the ambition to do more.
Yep.
It also breeds leadership.
Yep.
Which is something we've seen in the IC as well. It's like, if you give people the ability to perform and to step up and to do jobs that are maybe, I won't say outside their capability, but above their scope of work, and then they get applauded for the outcome. I mean, when they grow and as they grow into a leadership role, they're going to remember that, and that's how they're going to lead.
Yep.
And it's just going to have this cascading effect down on, you're going to be pulling people up. So it's a culture of growth, a culture of leadership, a culture of winning, and not taking credit for other people. So that's great, man.
It's something. It's one of my go-to phrases at work when I work with my team is, "I trust you." They need to know that I trust them. They need to know that in a pinch, if I'm unavailable to do something, that I know that our department, our team is in good hands. And just like you said, I mean, at the end of the day, what that's going to do is they're going to carry that forward. That's going to create culture within a team. But it starts with me not only saying these things, but then acting in the sense of, if I trust them, I have to fully trust them. I need to step back. I don't need to micromanage. I don't need to be the babysitter.
I was going to ask you, what happens? Your term is "I trust you." What happens when you don't trust them? That becomes a big issue in terms of the culture and the team and the place that person has on your team.
Yeah.
That goes back to we were talking about how some guys self-select out, though.
Right.
You may not fit the culture of the team at a certain point. For instance, you end up with an employee that you don't trust. That person's probably going to self-select out from your team because you've built it around a culture of trust and innovation.
Exactly. And you need to have a dynamic enough team that is okay with individuals like that self-selecting out.
Yeah.
If you are not in a position where you can tolerate or handle the ability of somebody leaving because they don't fit your culture, you're not doing it right. So it's really up to you to establish that culture and stick to your guns. It's really important that if you're saying this is who we are as a group, that we don't deviate from that, because it's really easy for any sort of culture to crumble if you tell one person something and then somebody else in the team something entirely different. Or if you tell somebody to do something and you in turn don't do it. What does that do for a team or a culture? It erodes it more quickly than anything.
Yeah. And for the guys who don't know what we talk about when we're saying self-select out, right? The concept there is that we've set a standard for the culture or for the team. Within the culture, there's a standard that gets developed and an expectation that gets developed. And if you're not meeting that standard, you're not meeting that expectation. Well, that expectation, that standard is a requirement for participation in that team, whatever it is, whether it's an Iron Council battle team, a team at work, or a family. Sometimes there's standards that are required to be part of a family. If you're not meeting those, that's not the leader saying you're off the team. That's you deciding that you are not capable enough to be on that team and you self-selecting out. It may come down to the leader saying, "Hey, you're not pulling your weight. We can't have that around here." I'm running into that right now at work with one member of my team that I may have to cut ties with. But it's not because it's because the expectation has been set. They've agreed to work towards that expectation. They're not meeting that expectation. Ergo, they are self-selecting out. They are choosing to not up their game enough to be part of the group, to be part of the team, and to meet the expectations.
So I'm going to ask you a question regarding this concept of self-selecting out. I'm pretty sure I know where you're going to go with this, but just for listeners out there who might have some questions. If there's somebody in your team who is choosing to not adhere to the culture that you're trying to establish, but maybe there's some want to there. Maybe there's some hurdles mentally, emotionally that they're unwilling to clear or they haven't been able to clear yet, but they're still trying to shoot for that standard, but they're not there yet. Where does that line of delineation cut off? Right? Like you're willing to tugboat somebody along for X amount of time, but there does come a definitive point where, okay, I've done it long enough. They're unwilling to do the work. Where does that point of self-selection come into play?
That's a really good question. And it comes down to the leader. It comes down to the team. And it comes down to the group. I'll say this. In most groups that I'm part of, whether it's work or personal, as long as the person is legitimately working hard to improve and and is striving to meet that bare minimum level of expectation, they're usually okay with the group because people see the hard work, they see the effort. You do have to see some forward progress over time. If they just stagnate, but they're working hard, then maybe you just don't have what it takes to be part of this group, and that's okay. We'll help you find another group. And that's really not what I was talking about with the self-select out part, to be honest with you. But it is part of that situation. What I was really talking about was the guy who just decides that they're going to do things their own way and pick and choose parts of the expectations that they're going to meet. Those are the guys who are truly self-selecting out because they're truly self-selecting not to do certain parts of or not to meet certain parts of the expectation. So the guys who are working, people who are working towards meeting that minimum, level of whatever, I'm willing to work with those people, and I'm more than happy to, like you said, tugboat them and pull them in. People who seemingly voluntarily choose to pick and choose which parts of the expectation they're not going to meet, those are the people who self-select out right away. And hey, it's been nice, but it's just, this isn't a good fit.
Yeah, and I think the first part of your answer kind of went to where I was originally trying to ask, in that there are some people who lack some self-awareness,
Yeah.
who don't fit the cultural mold that we're striving for, are refusing to really fully do the work that they need to or contribute in a meaningful way, yet they lack the self-awareness to self-select themselves out.
Yeah. And I'll say this too about it is I'll tugboat to an extent. And I've been in situations where you're tugboating, meaning you're helping the person and they're making progress. And then as soon as you remove the tugboat and you put them to their own devices, they backslide.
Yeah.
You can't tugboat forever, right? They have to be able to make gains on their own. They have to be able to make progress on their own at some point. And if it gets to the point where no matter how much help you're giving, when you remove that help, they start to backslide, then it's not a good fit. And we're getting a little bit more into leadership as opposed to culture, but it's very important. It's an important part of culture because the leader is usually the one dictating the culture, or at least enforcing it.
That's such a powerful concept, though, if you think about it from a cultural perspective. This ebb and flow, this give and take. There comes a point invariably where somebody has to sink or swim. Mm-hmm. And somebody cannot meaningfully contribute to a culture if they are constantly needing a hand up or a handout. Like if they're unwilling to participate, to give as well as take, they're not going to be able to meaningfully contribute to that culture and help it become what it can invariably become.
Yep.
Coming back to, the Iron Council and what we created in Romulus it was a great team. We had awesome men. We also had guys who were kind of floating along for a long time. And we had to make some very difficult decisions in, giving them an opportunity to sink or swim. When they sank, we had to let them know tactfully and kindly that, what, this isn't working for you. This isn't working for us. An important thing with this idea of culture is it is a necessary thing to be able to excise, individuals who are not helping contribute positively to its growth. You have to be willing to do that if you're going to grow.
You use the words hand up and hand out. And I think those are great words because the people who need the occasional hand up, not a problem.
Right.
People who need the hand out, those are your problem child.
Yeah.
Because the handouts are people who are constantly looking for it. The hand up is the guy who's struggling and you walk over and you say, let me help you. And they go, oh, thanks. And then they just dig in and they do work. And they're like, this guy was able to help me just get over that speed bump. And now I can go. To me, that should be part of your culture, regardless of what the group is, because that shows an ability and empathy for the people who are not performing as well and a willingness to help. And I can't imagine a group where that's not valued. I'm even thinking about, you brought up Jocko before, right? So I'm thinking about these high performing military groups, whether it's SEALs or, whatever, special operations or whatever. I can't imagine that in those groups, the concept of a hand up doesn't come into play once or twice, because those guys aren't going to be awesome at everything, right? They're all going to have their stud moments and they're all going to have their slacker moments. They probably all just have fewer slacker moments than the average Joe. But it got to imagine that the reason those teams work is because the guys who are studs in one area are helping the guys who are struggling in that area. And then when the tables are turned, that switch flips and the roles reverse. That the concept of a rising tide floats all boats comes into play, where they all just help each other come up to a higher average.
That's really powerful, man. It's I don't know what else there is to add. I think that's a pretty good summation.
Culture is a tricky thing. You talked about family before, and it's something we really haven't talked about yet tonight. I've never really thought about culture in the sense of family, but now that we're talking about it, it's such an important thing.
Yeah.
It is really an important thing to define what the culture of your family is. And I think this is where some people fall down in terms of parenthood, is because they don't think of it that way. And I'll fully admit, I haven't thought about it that way directly, but indirectly, I've had a lot of thought about this. Like, how do I want my kids raised? How do I want them to act in public situations? How do I want them to act to each other, to us as parents? How do we act towards our kids? Are we our kids' friends? Whatever. Can't tell you how many people I know who are their kid's best friend. And listen, I'm not going to tell you how to parent your kids. I'll just tell you, I think that's wrong. You should
It's
not be
terrible.
your kid's best friend. You're doing them a disservice. You can be more equal to them when they're adults and kind of doing their own thing, but you're their parents when they're little and they're raising them. I'm going to get off my soapbox on that one, but it all plays into the culture of a family, and you can define what that looks like. I know, like, for instance, my family, my wife and my daughters, we definitely have a certain culture. There are certain expectations on how each one of us will act in certain areas, and our roles and responsibilities, and the a general level of expectation for each of us. That's a culture. So
Yeah, culture matters. And it's easy to be caught up on this term of family culture, something that most people don't think about. It's really like a family dynamic, how you function together as a unit and what that looks like. And you think of healthy dynamics within a family setting, and that's establishing a positive culture.
yeah,
It's important that kids have healthy relationships with their parents, that parents have healthy relationships one with another, husband and wife. Because when those kids grow up, they're going to want to try to do the same. Just like any culture, I look at the culture we established in Romulus, and I'm trying to continue that on today with the team I established. I use a lot of elements of that culture we established in managing my team, obviously with some adjustments, like at work. I can't be as default aggressive in a work setting as I could have been with you jackasses. But I take elements of that and I try to apply that to every situation that I'm in to create that sort of culture, that sort of environment. Same thing with family. It's what we do.
it's a really cool idea to think about how you can bring different pieces of cultures into different places in your life. Just like you, right? I went from Romulus. I started another team. I brought a lot of that culture with me.
Yeah.
We've both tweaked it a touch and made it our own, thrown our own color at it, but the bones are the same. And I've learned so much from that culture and how successful it is. Just like you, I'm trying to bring that culture in a different flavor into work, right? A culture of default aggressive, a culture of growth, a culture of expectation, goal setting, that kind of stuff. Can't be as aggressive,
Right.
but you can take the bones of it and take the concepts of it and put it together. So the cool thing is you can move cultures around, and you can shift and take the pieces and put them together and figure it out. Even in my family, a lot of what I've learned working with you guys has transpired into the culture that we're working on with our family. And again, listen, I'm dealing with 2 teenage daughters and a wife. I'm not going to be nearly as aggressive in that setting and just blunt and straightforward as I am with you guys, but we can still use a lot of the same goal setting mentalities, a lot of the same
the culture of
planning,
accountability.
accountability, yeah, all that stuff.
The biggest part of our culture is that we established there was this concept of leaning in, right?
Yeah.
Like we've got to be able to win. And it comes full circle back to what you said. Any culture that you're hoping to establish, especially in your family, I mean, as much as anything, is it starts at the top. It starts with you. If you want to establish something, if you're saying, I want you guys to tell me when something's going wrong, you sure as hell better be the first. If you're having a bad day, to tell your wife or your kids.
Yeah, it's really funny how that part of it specifically has translated over into my family. I used to be the guy who would blow up, and no lie, I still blow up from time to time, but I'm now the guy who blows up and in due time comes back and first apologizes and then explains what caused it. I don't try to use it as an excuse, but I try to explain it and use it as, hey, listen, this is what set me off. I apologize. I'm going to do better in the future. But just that leaning in and that recognition of your faults and like we said, leaning in, it goes a long way, and it helps, and it sets that culture of expectation in the family that we're not just here to beat each other up. We're here to lean on each other. We're here to take pride in each other. And you can't do that without letting people know what's going on.
Yeah. So. One last thing that came to me as we were talking about this when it comes to culture is if you can establish a healthy culture within an environment, when the shit hits the fan, because it always does,
always,
it's not going to tear the system down.
Right.
Because the culture has been established, because we know what the expectations are. When the shit hits the fan, it's a blip on the radar. We know how to handle it. We know how to move forward and get back on our feet.
Well, not only that, when the shit hits the fan, the team comes together.
Yeah.
Whatever that team is.
It's another
we just had one of our guys go through some major shit in life, and we came together as a team and were able to support him in a pretty awesome way. And that is 100% related to the culture that we have set up. I think that's a great way to end it. I mean, the fact that culture just drives that and grows that unity and allows everyone to kind of lean in and help each other. It's reason enough to build a strong culture. Awesome, man. Great episode. Good chat. I really appreciate it. I want to thank all the guys for listening. Make sure you're checking us out online. We've got the show notes for this and all of our other episodes on untamingmasculinity.com. You can find our social media there. The two ones that we're really working right now. Check us out on Instagram. We really want to get our followers up there. I think we're closing in on 200 followers there, so I'd really like to get to that number. That'd be great. And then YouTube. We've been seeing some gains on YouTube, right? We've got all of our episodes up there. So you can check us out, listen to us there as well as on your podcast player. Wherever you're listening to us, leave us feedback, leave us ratings, reviews, give us likes on YouTube. It all helps us to get the message out and have other men listening to this and helping other men. Finally, we just want to make sure you guys come back for next week. We're working on some great interviews here in the new year. We're going to start to push the envelope and try to get some even bigger guests on. So as we grow the podcast, that helps. So you guys helping us grow the podcast helps us get better guests on. And we just want to thank you. It's been a great run so far. Like we mentioned last week, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. So that's a really exciting thing for us. And we're excited to just provide more good content for the rest of this year. So thanks again for listening. And we will leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?